feel like normally I'm always too close to the camera, so I'm trying this, but now let's just don't look at the background. That's how we're gonna solve that. It is September. I am 9 months and 1 day on testosterone. I had a pretty good reading month this month. I had a fun little month anyway. I did a lot of stuff. It was weird. My camera's dropping. I went on a lot of random little trips, so fuck it, I'm also gonna throw a little book haul in here, because we all know what happens when I take myself out for a day of fun. It's not fun until a book has been bought. Anyway, let's get into the books that I read this month. It was 5 this month, which is a nice number, I think. The first book I read, I already mentioned in last month's video, although I did upload it like a week ago, so. The Yield by Tara June Winch. I keep being confused by her name because I keep wanting to say Tara Westover, even though I haven't read that one book by Tara Westover that everyone always talks about. Anyway, Tara June Winch, The Yield. I talked about it in the last wrap-up because I was deep into reading it at the time, and so I had a lot to say about it. This is an Australian book. It's won an Australian Literature Prize. I read this because I realized that I had pretty much never read an Australian book, and I wanted to know more about Australian, especially Indigenous culture, and I thought that this book might be a good place to start, and it was. This book does a very interesting thing in that it follows 3 different kind of narrative styles. The first one follows, what was her name? August, who is a 20-something-year-old who moved away from her small town in Australia, out of the country, moved to London, which is kind of irrelevant, but the point is that she comes back to bury her grandfather, who has passed away recently, which is, otherwise why would she bury him? And then while she's there, things happen. She thinks about her childhood a lot. There's stuff going on with the land as well, and she just thinks about her family and the history of the land that she lives on a lot. The second narrative is a letter from the reverend who built this place where they live. It was a mission at the time, and it turned into a little town, or at least part of a little town. I don't really understand. There was 2 separate place names that they kept using what seemed like interchangeably, but I don't think it was. Anyway, the guy, it was a white guy who built the mission for Aboriginal people to live on. He's sort of recounting the things that happened, and especially the way that white people would treat the Indigenous people. He's kind of contemplating his own complicity in all of that, even though he thinks he kind of has a white savior complex, but he comes to some realizations near the end that make him see the light, which was a very interesting thing to sprinkle in here. But what was by far the greatest thing about this book, and I don't wish it would have been the entire book, but like if it had been the entire book, it might have been even better. But the last piece of narrative is the dictionary that the grandfather of August, who was an Aboriginal man, wrote to bring the language of his people back to life and back into the current memory. And instead of just explaining what every word means, he gives a little anecdote, a little personal story with every word that he recounts. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful way to speak of a lost culture and a lost language. It was just beautiful. It's hard to explain. I hope that sells you on it though, because it just, if you like that kind of thing, like especially if you like the linguistics and stuff, which I do, but also if you love Indigenous cultures and stories and just beautiful family saga stuff, give this one a try. It was really, really good. I think the grandfather, his name was Albert Gondiwendi. He's one of my favorite book characters of all time. He was so sweet. The way that his parts were written was so endearing and so sweet, but at the same time he had some gut to him. He was a cool guy. I really liked him a lot. The next book I read is this one, Zijn Jongen by Corrie Slee. Corrie Slee is a Dutch author, a children's book author, who was very popular when I was young. I don't know if she's still popular, but she was always writing about very serious things, about kids going through very heavy things. I don't think I read that much by her when I was younger myself. But this is her memoir about her father and the way that her father treated her when she was a child, mostly, which was as if she was his son. What's weird to me is she doesn't really delve into why he did that, or like what the mental gymnastics behind that were. She doesn't really go into that part of it, which I was kind of hoping for. And also, Corrie Slee, she is a lesbian, and she also doesn't identify as a woman. She's practically non-binary, but she doesn't really use specific terms for that. But what I will say, her family dynamics were extremely interesting. Her mother was very mentally ill. Her father, he was a special person, and he was definitely not making things better on her mother or his kids. She's written this around the events of his death, driving towards her mother's house, wondering about her father's death, essentially, processing it and letting it sink in on her as she recounts her entire childhood. Yeah, all of that was really good. It was very interesting. I read it very quickly because it was very enticing, but I did think it was kind of a shame that it wasn't more about the gender thing, because it was so strange. It was almost like he was delusional about that, but she didn't really address that part. And it's also interesting that she actually did turn out to be non-binary, so like maybe he was kind of right, but she didn't really address that. And she also didn't really address the way her father reacted when she came out to him as someone who loves women. But I guess it also kind of rounds up to the fact that he never really spoke out about being proud of her, or he never really said anything positive about her. I think it kind of rounds up well with that the book didn't really come back around to all those things either. So it was good. It was very interesting. If you're Dutch and if you know, going to say, if you're Dutch, you probably do. Yeah, give this one a try. It was good. Then the next thing I read was There by Tommy Orange, Gertrude Stein quote, by the way. This is about Native American people in the city of Oakland, California, living their lives in the current day, although there were also some that were not in the current day. The prologue of this was one of the greatest things I ever read. It was quite heavy because it's about Native Americans and the way they came to live as they do now, which kind of a heartbreaking story, but it was written so well that my hopes for this book were immediately just very, very high. However, the book itself, every chapter was about a different person, which I didn't really see coming, and also to me was just kind of confusing. I didn't really like that part of it. I just like to follow one character or a bunch of characters for the rest of the book. That's more my kind of vibe, so like following a different person every chapter was kind of exhausting to me. Of course, it did all come together in the end in a way that was heartbreaking, to say the least. Yeah, it was good. It was just, it didn't quite live up to the expectations that I set up after reading that prologue, if that makes sense. But it was good. Then the next thing I read was Concerning My Daughter by Kim Hye-jin. I read this because I take an interest in mother and queer daughter relationships in literature, and I might want to write my thesis about that. I'm not sure yet, actually, but I figured that if I'm gonna do that, I had to read this book. Obviously. The writing to me was just mid. I didn't really enjoy it that much. The story, I also didn't enjoy that much. But it did give me some insights on the mother's perspective of a complicated mother and queer daughter relationship. So at least that's that. I don't really have that much more to say about it. Then next, I listened to an audiobook. I did that a lot last year. I haven't really done that at all this year. Maybe I should get back on that. I listened to the audiobook for De meeste mensen deugen by Rutger Bregman. Dutch book, again, sorry. This one actually has been translated. I think it's called Humankind in English. This is a very interesting book that I liked a lot. Rutger Bregman, he's a historian. Basically, he's done tons of research to set out to prove that humans are inherently good people. Like, we're not inherently evil. We're not savages who are held together by the restraints of society. He's set out to prove that it's quite the opposite, and actually society is what is making us kind of feral. The points that he makes are so very interesting. There's a million super interesting anecdotes in this book. He goes very in depth about human history. I mean, the hunters and gatherers, he goes that far back, and he has a lot to say about it that I would never have known otherwise. The whole story about Easter Island, that was very interesting. He talks about The Lord of the Flies and the way that it was received at the moment, because it talks a lot about how the media and common beliefs that people have that are completely ungrounded in science or completely incorrect. Experiments that have been done either prove something completely the opposite of what it was trying to prove, or the way it's been communicated to the public is just completely false. Like, he talks about how the Stanford prison experiment was completely biased and didn't actually prove anything that we generally think it proved. All of that was super interesting, but I find it very hard to talk about what I learned from this book. I think you should just listen to it yourself and see what you think of it, because essentially what this book tries to do is give you a more positive view of the people around you, because he starts out by saying that people generally tend to believe that they are good themselves, but the people around them are selfish and egotistical. And what he's saying is that is just simply not the truth. We are actually all kind at heart. It's a very positive outlook, but it's seen as a very unrealistic and utopian idea, when actually it's not any less realistic than all people being evil at heart. Actually, it's more realistic. If we all think that we are the good ones, what does that say? Anyway, it was a lot of food for thought. I think it's a really big book. I don't know, because I listened to it, but yeah, it's huge, and there's a lot of information in that just baffled me. I gave it 5 stars because it was just... It's one of those books, you know. I very much recommend that one. That was all the books I read. Let's do a cheeky little book haul. At the beginning of this month, I found a book in a free little library, and it was Zadie Smith Swing Time, which is crazy to me because I normally don't even find any English books in the free little libraries around my house, especially not Zadie Smith ones. I actually found NW by Zadie Smith, also in a free little library, but it was not in my neighborhood, so it made more sense. But anyway, then I went to Amsterdam with the one and only Sally Thames. If you don't know her, give her a follow on Instagram. I don't know. She also talks about books a lot. That's why we're friends. And we went to my favorite bookstore in Amsterdam, which is Book Exchange. I found Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. Heard great things about it. I've been very excited to read a family saga. I'm interested in the concept of that. I don't think I've ever really read one. There's probably one behind me right now that I just forgot about. But anyway, yeah, I've been interested in that one, so I'm glad that I managed to find it secondhand. It's huge. It's a commitment I'm going to have to make someday. Then I found Ali Smith's Winter, which is fun because that's the next one that I wanted to read in the seasonal quartet. Then, if you know me, you already know what I did. I went to the W, which I always do in this bookstore because they always have a Jeanette Winston that I previously didn't have. And again, I found Lighthouse Keeping. Is that what it's called? Yeah, it's called Lighthouse Keeping. No idea what it's about, but Jeanette Winston is my favorite author of all time, and so I'm sure it's going to be great. After that, after Sally went home, I was like, what am I going to do with the rest of my summer? Basically, what I did was I went to a random city. Well, I only did it twice, but yeah. First, I went to Zwolle. Do with that what you will. Zwolle was great, actually. I'd never been. I liked it. Anyway, I found a really cool church there that had books inside. They have a bookstore inside a church, which is cool and all, but before that, I found a church that just had random secondhand books in it. It was very weirdly organized, but I loved it. And so I walked around and I looked at all the books, and I found this one, The Carnivorous Lamb by Agustin Gomez Arcos. It's gay. I noticed right away because of the 3 triangles. And it's also Spanish. 2 things that I'm very enthusiastic about. I feel like I've heard about this, but I can't remember for the life of me where. I'm just intrigued. So, yeah, probably gonna read it someday. Then the next week, I went to Leeuwarden, another city I had never been. I went to a great bookstore that they had. What was it called? Van der Velde? Van der Velde. Ooh, there's Post-its in here. Bro, I just love secondhand books. The secondhand section was nice. They didn't have a lot of English books though, but among the English books I did find Between the Acts by Virginia Woolf. I have a lot of Virginia Woolf books. I've read some of them even. I love Virginia Woolf. I'm just very intimidated by her work. Last year over the summer, I read To the Lighthouse, and I read it very slowly, and it was a very good way to do that. And I was kind of planning to do that this summer as well, but I didn't. It's not like I read that many other things. I could have done it, but I didn't. Anyway, this is, I believe, her last book, which is interesting to me. I might read it at some point. In that case, I'm actually not that sure, but I've read 5. Like, that's pretty impressive. I can do another one. It's just that I have like 5 more in my bookcase that are still unread. Anyway, then I want to get to the things that I'm reading now because I'm quite excited about both of them. I usually don't try to read 2 novels at the same time, but in this case, I was reading Young Mungo, which I'm enjoying very much. It's very good. I'm very immersed in this world of Glasgow in the 90s, I believe this is. It's setting a scene and it's doing it wonderfully. It's really good. But I went on another trip this week to Brussels and I couldn't bring this for reasons I think you might be able to figure out by looking at this cover. I have nothing against gay people. I am a gay people, but like, you don't want to aggravate your fellow bus passengers. I don't know. I just didn't want to bring this, okay? And I think that's fair. What I did instead, I went out and I bought Private Rights by Julia Armfield, which I've been very excited about since it's been out, since it was announced, actually, because I was around for that. I loved Oh, Wives Under the Sea, which is right there on my favorite shelf. This is great. I've almost finished it. I'm that far in. It's great. It's very dark and gloomy and rainy. I would very much recommend reading this while it's raining. It's not even a question if you're going to read this. I'm just suggesting that you read it while it's raining wherever you are. That's been it. You know what's weird? I didn't buy any books in Brussels. I tried. I went into several bookshops. Most of them were very French focused. None of them had any secondhand books. I don't know. It was weird vibes. I didn't want to buy anything. But that's weird for me. It feels like a trip unfinished if I didn't buy a book there. I did, however, spend 10 euros on one tiny little baggie of orange chocolate. It's incredible though. Anyways, that's been that. That's been my August. It slipped away into a moment of time. I couldn't not say that. I guess I'll see you next month. Bye.